This is your last chance. After this...
Or should we not follow the advice of the galactically stupid?
That is a nice boulder.
Ludicrous speed! Go!
Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you pre-recorded from two undersized apartments in New York City, it's Revenge of the Film Nerds.
There, we're in a tight spot.
I hate when people talk during the movie.
With your hosts, Black Crystal.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
And Jack Manley.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
A podcast for nerds by nerds.
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Failure is not an option.
And now, here are your hosts, Black Crystal and Jack Manley.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your girl, BK, and I'm so glad to be back in action with another amazing episode of Revenge of the Film Nerds. I am so hyped. It's been a minute, and I am joined with the amazing, the extraordinary, manly Jack Manley. Jack, how are you doing today? I'm so excited to be back in this.
Bent but not broken, I think, is the best response I can give there. It has been a couple of months, hasn't it, BK?
Oh my goodness. What can we say, right? 2020 fall/winter is probably been the most difficult thing, at least in our generation, in our existence. And, you know, trying to maintain a podcast through all of that and what happened in the Capitol, especially being directly affected, it's been difficult to say the least. So we had to take a short break. But
yeah, you know, it was only, the peak seasonality for SARS viruses over the winter, and, then there was the fascist plot, and then there was another potential fascist plot, and, these little things, they tend to get in the way just a teensy bit.
Yeah, only a little bit, yeah. But I'm glad to be here, and I'm so hyped to hear that, we are going to get into a very iconic film today that is your favorite, Jack. I'm actually surprised. We talked about this. We talked about all the different directors that we were going to show here. You know how we like to geek out about the peeps we showcase in the films that we get into. And, well, this one is Quentin Tarantino. And now, before everybody's getting crazy, I know, right? Why isn't it the big three, right? Why isn't it this? I'm going to tell you that, but you know who tells it better? Jack does, because you say it literally perfectly as to why this is the film we chose to showcase Quentin Tarantino in our first season.
Yep, we're teasing them a little bit because I know people are expecting something like a Pulp Fiction or a Reservoir Dogs, one of like the true OG classics. But I go a different route with Tarantino, and we're going to take you down that route right now because we are going to look at the 1997 film Jackie Brown, which is written for the screen and directed by Quentin Tarantino and is based on the novel Rum Punch by Elmore Leonard. Now, BK, you mentioned this is my favorite Tarantino film, but it's also the film I think is the best of his repertoire to start with because it is, in a way, like... It feels weird to say this, but it's like the least Tarantino of all Tarantino films, if you get what I'm saying. It's not something that is using the hyper-sensationalized violence as a metaphorical tool. This is a much more subdued story for Tarantino. It's a more personal piece. It is very character-driven. The violence that is quintessential to Tarantino's style does absolutely appear throughout the film, but it's not done in a gratuitous way in the service of using that gratuity for a higher point. The violence is a very human aspect of a human story here. And I think it's Tarantino at his best when it comes to his screenwriting ability. I think it is some of his directorial work, and I have to say, it's some of the best editing work by his longtime editor, Sally Menke. May she rest in peace.
Oh my goodness. You said it so correctly when you said it's subdued, right? So when you think Quentin Tarantino, right, you're thinking bloodfest. That's the first thing you think, right? You just blood on screen, gore, and big lettering, title cards, right? Those are the trademarks. Now with this, you get the sprinkles, right? With this one in Jackie Brown, but it's almost honestly, it's more tactful. It's honestly feels more intentional. I know that the gore fest is honestly what turns people away from some Quentin Tarantino films. I know people who haven't seen some of those big popular three that we mentioned to this day. So first off, like, I'm glad we talked about that. But second of all, this film is actually pretty dang good, to say the least. Space. It was my first time watching it for the podcast, but we ended up watching it twice because of our delay. And my God, it was even better the second time.
Those films that you go back and you find new things to reflect on at all times. And I don't know if that's necessarily due to the absence of violence, because to be fair, in a lot of his other violent works where the violence is in service of a point, like we talked about this with Kill Bill being a send-up of the Kung Fu style, despite the fact that it's lacking that, it's a very accessible film, and it's an engrossing film because it is a focus on bringing out the drama through the very human situations that transpire over the course of this film. And that really is, in my opinion, where Tarantino is at his strongest. The other script that people like to point to as as emblematic, I should say, of his genius is the script he wrote for True Romance, which came out in 1993. But unlike True Romance, which was much more a very unorthodox love story, but ultimately was basically posed in a way that it was against sort of the typical Hollywood standard, Jackie Brown subverts romance in very different and interesting ways that we'll get into, because romance is not the focus of this, but it is a facet of the human experience you go through in this film. And we could rant on it. I could rant gibberish at you right now about all these reasons I love the film, but we need to get into it, BK, because there's so much to break down here, and I'm excited to hear how you've started to condense those ideas into that BK synopsis.
Oh man, the BK synopsis. Let's go. Here we go. After being picked up by the ATF agents while entering the country with $50,000, an aging, beautiful flight attendant schemes with a love-struck Bill Bosman to start a new life by playing the authorities against her criminal benefactor, a two-bit gun dealer with a penchant for violent and abusive behavior, during a plan to move his ill-gotten gains into the country. It is fire.
Talking about it, being a character piece and a human piece, but yeah, when you look at the synopsis like that, the story is very basic but very engrossing. This is, that very pulpy crime novel style plot that is something that we have been eating up as a nation for over a century at this point, believe it or not, BK.
I'm new to this. See, I hate to come out the gate and I'm like, look, I'm going to be honest. You know what? This is why I love you and me, right? I admit when I am not in the know. And my God, I am not in the know. I was this many years old when I understood what pulp fiction meant. And I have no idea. So I need you to break it down like you busted it down for me during our viewing on where these kind of stories even came from.
A shame that more people aren't educated on Pulp Fiction as a tradition in American culture. We know about it probably in our generation more as like the airport novel, or you might have heard your parents refer to it as the dime store novel. But what it is it's this continuation of the American tradition of storytelling in its most basic form. We were not, for the most of our history, we were not long-form storytellers. We are a culture that is very invested in the short story, whether it was Allan Poe back at the turn of the 18th century, whether it was, Melville and Hawthorne in the 19th century. But we've always had that short story tradition, and at the end of the 19th century, the sort of obsession worldwide with the work of Charles Dickens led us to start really serializing work in the way that we now understand serialization in television or in, comic books. But it really began with a magazine called Argosy back in 1896. And they were invested in publishing a large periodical that had multiple serialized stories in it. And this was, everything from crime stories to, romance to, all of the kind of hacky, sort of easy and contrived subjects that we all gravitate towards when we're looking for brain food. And so that's really where the pulp phenomenon was born out of. It was born out of the American short story, and it was born out of that obsession in the late 19th century with serialization. And it would reach its peak really between the 20s and the 40s, at the same time as the kind of adventure serials and B-roll types, films we have discussed previously on this podcast. So those traditions were very synonymous in the early 20th century.
That's so cool, because I'm glad that you mentioned that. You're like, we're short story people, right? You're right. You outed me. I love anime. They short stories. Let's be honest here, okay? In and out. And I think that's kind of why this movie hits. And it's not even just a movie, Jack, right? This is actually based off of a novel. I had no idea. So how do we go from, short story novelization to breathing life to this stylistic piece from Quentin Tarantino? Like, how did we get there?
Almost, died completely in the 1950s. The post-war explosion in paperback novels, in comic books, and of course, the proliferation of television into sort of a dead art form, to the point where in 1957, the American News Company, which was the largest distributor in the United States of pulp fiction, was liquidated. So we had sort of lost this tradition were it not for a couple of writers who would sort of adopt and adapt that style for the late 20th century. And that's where we get to the guy who wrote Jackie Brown, or rather wrote Rum Punch, Elmore Leonard. Now, this was one of the coolest things I've ever discovered doing research. As I mentioned Argosy magazine as the, birth of the, pulp phenomenon. Well, Elmore Leonard's first job in the early 50s was writing westerns and crime novels for Argosy. So he literally got his start as a writer in this, birthplace of this pulpy exploitative writing, and it influenced his style throughout his career.
Wow. Because I'm like, it's like putting the pieces together, because you notice the trend. Like, it's very apparent when we like kind of faded away from these types of styles and things, but you never really know why. So when you tell it like that, you're like, okay, that makes sense. Now, how do we get that revival, though? Because in a sense, we kind of watched those vibes come back into the mainstream a little bit.
It's an interesting phenomenon. I think at a certain point it does get back to what we discussed, that sort of that American predilection for short form storytelling. Is we like being able to, think about what's going to happen next. We like the good cliffhanger after a nice setup. There are little things that exist in that hacky B-style culture that Americans love and embrace, and I think that's a pretty cool thing about us, to be honest, is, it's a very optimistic way of looking at art, in that we can get something even out of the most contrived circumstances. But it really does, at the end of the day, come down to, I think, a lot of Elmore Leonard's work personally, because one thing that he really was synonymous with throughout his career was his novels becoming very successful, and films that were very synonymous with different genres. Like, he's the guy who wrote the book that eventually became 3:10 to Yuma. He wrote the books that became Get Shorty and Be Cool. And of course he wrote Jackie Brown. It's a style that takes a lot of dedication, and it's a style that takes a lot of criticism, because it can be very hacky and easily sort of seen through writing if you think about it that way. But Leonard's philosophy was always, and you see this in Jackie Brown, it was always to write for dialogue. You don't want to write to sound like a writer. His one rule was, if I write something that sounds like writing, I rewrite it.
I love that. I need to live by that. And honestly, you can kind of tell, like, and I don't know if it's just because, Jackie Brown is kind of one of those hangout films, and I know we're talking about the writing as well, but it makes sense. Like, it's more about how things are happening, the experience. It's not about very strict I don't know, storytelling, but at the same time, there is intention behind kind of everything that happens in this situation. And I was fascinated when you told me about how, Jackie Brown's portion within the original novel is actually not that long.
No, absolutely not. She's kind of a secondary character through the story of Rum Punch, which is much more about these gun runners, Ordell Roby and Lewis in the film. But, bringing the focus on Jackie, there's a lot of interesting subtext to talk about there. But it's really a consequence of the fact that Leonard leaves these characters that are so ripe for development in his work that when you get a book like Rum Punch in the hands of a creative like Tarantino, who is, I should mention, somebody who will legitimately watch anything, even like the crappiest made-for-TV movies are not beneath his viewership. And so when you get a guy who has an appreciation for pulp and kind of hacky work as legitimate within the art form, and you get him a novel like Rum Punch, which is fairly exploitative, but at the same time written in such a gripping way, somebody like that's going to run with that. And that's kind of what happened with Tarantino here. Is he was sort of at the height of his powers at this point, coming off of Pulp Fiction's success, but he was very, very hesitant to do another film at this point until he, got the rights to Rum Punch. And even then, he wasn't initially going to do the film, BK.
Whoa. Chotomate. First of all, I don't even know if I can envision somebody else doing this. Also, I got really loud. Sorry. I was just like, whoa, that surprised me.
Hey, it's okay. That's that passion there.
I know. Well, I'm like sitting here and I'm like, who could have done this story justice? Actually, who possibly, I don't know. So tell me, Jack, who is it?
When it was acquired by both Tarantino and his writing partner in the early 90s, Roger Avary, whom he did Reservoir Dogs, True Romance, and Pulp Fiction with. And they were looking at different projects. They were interested in other subject material by Leonard, including his novel Kill Shot, which had already previously been adapted into a film. But what happened was just a simple little thing. Tarantino went back and he reread Rum Punch, and he realized that he was in love with the novel. And that was really the impetus there. And you can kind of see that love in the way that the film pans out, because he sticks away. We've mentioned it, that this is a little bit more of a subdued film, but he sticks away from his violent sensibilities in a lot more form, which is an interesting touch for Tarantino, because we've talked about it a little bit. He is somebody who was very influenced by the birth of sensationalized violence in the film in the 60s. He got his influences from stuff like Bonnie and Clyde and The Wild Bunch, and was really, very tuned into that part of film history. And his violence, people detract from Tarantino on that front frequently. But in most cases in his films, the violence has a very important narrative point, even if it is gratuitous in nature. But with Jackie Brown, you can tell he had a respect for the subject material, because he didn't need to add those extra beats on top of the story. He let the violent events there be, as I've said before, naturalistic to the human experience, and really left his focus in the writing on the actual scripting of the story. And I think, as we'll see as we go through it, I think that's the right call here. But it's a very different project for Tarantino to pick up on, and it wasn't necessarily one that he enjoyed a huge amount of support from outside of the creative endeavor.
Wow. You're right, though. I'm glad you say that, because I feel like you look at this film, I know we said it earlier, but it's just, at a first glance, this just doesn't scream Tarantino. But then after watching it, you're like, of course it's him. Like, I honestly think that this is the pinnacle of him. And pinnacle, I'm like, doesn't he do much more work after this? And that is still pretty good, guys. Yes, that is true. But there's something about the way this film is executed that I think we really got to get into here.
Because there's something that we both noticed in this first introduction, which is literally just Jackie Brown, played by Pam Grier, the titular character, traveling through an airport in her job as a flight attendant, from, just traveling down one of those moving walkways and getting herself to her gate to do her job. But it is this really beautifully evocative montage that tells you a lot about her without really saying much, if anything.
Oh, yeah. The intro is phenomenal. And we talk about this film in various acts, but the intro is really dope. So in the start of the first, quarter of the film, you see her just, living her best life, going to work, doing the thing. Obviously, she's late, she's brisk walking, but there's something to be said. This is who we see. This is Jackie Brown. This film is going to be about her. And for me, it was honestly really empowering. Again, I had never seen this. I had no contents on this. I didn't know what I was walking into. And honestly, Jackie sounded like a white girl name. I had no idea. So I'm watching this and Jack's over here oh, this is my favorite movie. And I'm like, okay, all right. What is this Quentin Tarantino film? Dude, she is killing it. I'm learning all about the actress. I knew nothing about this. This was literally a realm that I knew nothing about, Jack.
No, Pam Grier was a legend in the blaxploitation scene, and she had some powerful roles, particularly in films like Foxy Brown and Coffee, that are just absolutely synonymous with that genre, and are really very kind of positive examples of black female empowerment, if I'm honest. Is that, that's one of the roots that this film comes through as well, is Pam Grier's casting was not an accident. Quentin Tarantino, throughout Jackie Brown, uses very important referential touches to reference the blaxploitation genre and what the, powerful discourse created by those films was, without making this a blaxploitation film. And it's very interesting to see things like Bobby Womack's Across 110th Street undergirding this image of this very powerful black woman who you can also see in those moments where she's in a hurry, she's struggling to keep that, that veneer that it seems like all women have to keep up, of always being on it, always being on top of your shit. She, has these little moments of weakness that you get clued into very subtly at the beginning, but you see her in this montage without really saying anything other than just hi to her colleagues and, saying work jargon. You see a well-rounded woman who's going to be a pretty interesting character to focus on and follow through the course of the film.
She is everything. I awoken an inner beast I didn't know I had. It's a whole new world. Look her up. She's got some gifts. She's got some good gifts out there in the internet. You'll thank me later. But that aside, on her outer beauty, her empowerment is really what set me off and really made me like this film. Set me off in a good way. She exudes, depth. She exudes empowerment. She has so much depth, and she really just sets the stage here without saying really any words. And the introduction you get from the film, you're like, okay, what's next? I'm ready to see what's going on. Is she the damsel in distress? And it's the tone says no, right? All your typical questions you have when you're going into a film, trying to figure out, what's going to happen, already speculating. Off top, the film is this girl is it. She's going to be it, and you better remember, because then the very next beat, we don't see her for a minute. We actually get introduced to a motley of characters.
Absolutely. It's worth noting at this point that Jackie Brown is a hard film to discuss just in raw terms of how the story plays out. Yes, the story is absolutely a function of what these characters do, and it gives them active things to do throughout the story, but we go away from Jackie and we get to Ordell Roby, played by Samuel Jackson, Louis Gara, played by Robert De Niro, and Melanie, played by Bridget Fonda, chilling at this house in Hermosa Beach, watching this gratuitous video called Chicks Who Love Guns, while Ordell, who is this 2-bit gun runner, is explaining how he kind of runs and operates his business selling machine guns to people. And it's this clue that yes, you're getting an eye into the world and sort of what the story is going to be about. It's vaguely going to be about crime centered around guns and things of that nature. But you're given a clue early on in the way that these people interact with each other and just are hanging out with each other that it's going to be an ensemble character-driven movie. And that's why you move away from Jackie in these early scenes. Yes, it is very much her film, but she is not going to succeed as a character throughout this film if she doesn't have interesting foils to bounce off of throughout the script. And Ordell, who is just already establishing himself as this incredibly menacing presence, is just the perfect starting off point to look at this film.
Guys, again, BK, I was this many years old when I saw Samuel L. Jackson with a pencil-thin braided goatee and a ponytail, question mark, straightened.
Sam Jackson.
Okay, yes, obviously he pulls it off. It's fantastic. It literally makes the character. Did I know I wanted it? No. Did I enjoy it? Yes. But my God, it's a shock. Like you're not ready, but it honestly, I think Ordell as a character sets you in the time period and is literally a cornerstone for the world building of what you're going to get into for this film. So when you meet him, you immediately get a sense of what era we are in, immediately get a sense of what neck of the wood we're in, right? Whose hood we're in, what type of money is on the line, and its legitimacy or not. You know off the bat that this is not a good guy. I mean, with his interactions with the people around him, let alone, but the way Samuel Jackson carries himself as this character just exudes a weird sense of sleazy. I don't even think that's the right word, because it's something else, man, and it's out of this world.
Up his own ability to be successful rather than actually showing the vestiges of his success. He's a real good talker, but that's the reasons that we know he's menacing. It isn't just down to seeing him and immediately kind of thinking of him as this kind of fake guy. He clues us into one of the real through lines in the film that you noticed, and I hadn't noticed over, several viewings of this film, is that the clearest indication you have of who you're supposed to root for and who you're supposed to hate in this film comes down to their treatment of women in this world. And as the more you get into it, you see how central the struggle of women and the experience of women is to the actual story of Jackie Brown. But right now, you're just seeing Ordell order around this surfer girl, Melanie, who is just, hanging around this apartment in Hermosa Beach getting high. But, she's getting ordered to go answer the phone, is being, having daggers stared at her when she doesn't immediately tell Ordell who is over the phone. And it's just this air of, disrespect and abusive behavior from Ordell towards women sets itself up immediately, and it is a very simple but effective way of showing, okay, this guy is absolutely scum. And I don't want to root for him, but I can see he's clever, so I know I'm going to be stuck with him for a while.
It's such a clever way to see what I did there. It is such a clever way to get introduced to this character, though, because one, they do the famous thing where they don't tell you anything. They're showing you everything, almost as if you're like a weird, hyper-focused, fly on the wall. It's a really cool play on that type of passive, observant perspective throughout the film. And the camera work throughout it really shows that you kind of are always present in these scenes, but not really inside the conversation. So everything kind of happens. That's why I feel like it's such an experience. You're just kind of here in those starting scenes, getting to know Ordell, getting to know Lewis, getting to know the cops as well as we get into that. And it really becomes this world that is strongly dependent on these characters, that is super grounded in the way they all treat each other, especially women. And it's fascinating to me that you see this throughout every, introduction of the new women in Ordell's life. Is pretty hilarious, going from one scene to the next of very interesting, exploitive situations involving women, just really shaping Ordell's character through other characters.
About it, and it's interesting because you see this as this first clue that he's insidious, but really Ordell's kind of defining moment early on is his interaction with Beaumont, played by Chris Tucker. Now, Beaumont is like a low-level operative of Ordell's who got run in for having a couple of unregistered firearms, and because he has a prior, he's looking at some serious time. So Ordell goes to his house, shows up grinning at the front door, connives a story in a very hilarious scene, to get Chris Tucker to wait in the trunk of Ordell's car with a shotgun. And then Ordell drives around the block and he caps him, which I know shocked you, BK, but it's that clear sort of point of no return moment. Like the moment after he kills him, he goes to pick up Lewis and shows him the body and basically gives him that ultimatum of we're hanging out, we're bullshitting as friends talking in my apartment, but this is what I'm about. Are you in or are you out?
Yeah, it really sets the stage and it sets the stakes. You really think, oh, maybe this is just going to be a vibe movie. Are we all just gonna just hang out the whole time? All right, let me go get a drink. And then all of a sudden, boom, my baby, R.I.P. Beaumont, gets murdered, and you're like, this is real. This ain't for play. And it really moves the piece onwards there, because this film at first is a little hard to get into because you're kind of confused as to the relevancy and the connections of the characters off top. But as soon as that first kill happens there, you're starting to see the pieces line up. And that's really where it starts to grip you. You're like, okay, where's this going? What is the connection here? How do these characters intermingle and eventually make sense? Because I was absolutely stunned with the frankness of how Ordell handled that situation and moved on to make business, but in such a nonchalant way.
He's very invested in the first act in proving to everyone around him that he is the alpha, or as I put it when we were watching it, that he's the big swinging dick in the room. That seems to be Ordell's preoccupation almost totally when he is going through the early parts of this world being set up. And it's interesting to see that because it's totally juxtaposed by the behavior of Max Cherry, the bail bondsman, who is played by Robert Forster. Now, Max Cherry is this, aging guy. He's clearly, run countless bonds over the course of running this business. And, when you first meet him as Beaumont is they're about to pay Beaumont's bond, you're introduced to Max Cherry in a very interesting shot. You start in his office and see them Ordell and Lewis drive up. But you're hearing Max be all about his business, discussing the terms of somebody skipping out of their bond very matter-of-factly. And you understand that this is another very powerful man. But unlike Ordell, when they interact with each other and have conversations in Max's office, Max isn't really invested in trying to show Ordell what he's about as a powerful person. He's an actual person with power who just simply goes about their business, handles their shit, and is on top of everything. And so he's one of the few characters early on that's able to actually throw Ordell for a loop, and it sets him up as this very interesting kind of meek guy who may not be all he seems.
Yeah, I think you said it accurately. It's really interesting how they set them up, and the power plays that you start to see, right? You really start to see Ordell, whip it out whenever he gets the chance, and try to finesse a situation that you're sort of uncovering yourself. And that's when I knew something was up. I was like, yo, all right, Ordell, this guy, I don't like him. Because you see Max and you're like, he's just everything. He's such a sweetheart. I'm in love. I didn't realize that I was going to watch a romance ? So so when you meet him, the bail bondsman, and you start to get to know him, you see him as this kind of old guy, but like he's not old in the way he carries himself. He's not old in the way he expresses himself and how he handles his business and how he's, checking it, keeping it 1-to-1 with the power plays with Ordell in these situations, being like, you can't one up on me, sir. Like, treat me and respect me. Stand on the level ground as me. Let's call it like it is. In these very, interesting conversations they're having about getting people out of what do we say?
Probably.
Yeah, I guess lock up, get them out of jail if they're already in jail. I don't know how that works. I'm a good child, okay?
Yeah, thankfully we've both stayed. We've not run
child.
afoul of the law, so thankfully we are not too familiar with our own bail bondsman.
Yes.
But, it's interesting too because Max, yeah, he is a very kind of sweet, unassuming guy, but, when Ordell does little things like, pulling the power play of immediately lighting a cigarette when he's in the office and asking where can he ash, just nonchalantly tossing him a coffee cup. When, Ordell tries to play the race card, Robert Forster's character throws it right back in his face, and Ordell immediately ponies up the money for a bond when he realizes that, like, his little shifty kind of sly talking style isn't gonna work. I mean, these are two, bulls going at each other and locking horns very early. But it's not done in an overwrought kind of way. It is in the vein of this film, just two people having a conversation. Like, we can't stress that enough in discussing this film. If you're looking for characters to tell you specific details of the plot, you're going to be left wanting. This movie doesn't spoon feed you. It makes you follow along these people and how they would naturally interact as human beings within conversations, and it forces you to figure out the subtext. It forces you to interpret them as human beings. In a very kind of peculiar way, as you mentioned earlier, it makes you kind of feel like you're a part of the film as a fly on the wall, because so much is left up to you to interpret. And it's done through the lens of just understanding these people as archetypes. We've seen our alpha characters in Ordell and in Max Cherry. We're going to get back to our, alpha female character, Jackie, in a couple of minutes. But we also have this grouping of people underneath Ordell, who, like Lewis or like Melanie, who are not driven people. They are kind of thralls to his magnificence, if I can put it that way. Lewis is a very passive individual. He's just gotten out of lockup, and he gives Melanie a little bit of attention, but he's not going to step to her because that's Ordell's girl, and all of this sort of stuff. And you see that there are people who are going to be impacted by the insidious nature of Ordell's plot, who are kind of along for the ride. They're kind of just there. And it's an interesting way to draw the dynamics early, because you're creating these tense dynamics between alpha males, but you're also seeing this very specifically drawn alpha-beta relationship in certain male-male relationships within the film. And it's a dynamic that is pervasive throughout the story.
I don't even know what more to add, because you really, hit that. At this point, you see them, and you're really starting to get a good grounding of who these characters are, where they live in the hierarchy of clearly Ordell's life, and how they have to navigate with him in it. And you start to see how that's going to have importance and relevance as we get to see Jackie Brown again.
Are negatively impacted by Ordell are good people themselves. In keeping with that theme of sort of negative treatment of women, our first real introduction to Lewis on his own is right before Ordell picks him up after killing Beaumont. He's just chilling at this girl Simone's house, who's like one of Ordell's, I guess you'd call them like kept women. But he's at this woman's house, just sitting in an easy chair, watching her put on a kind of sexualized singing performance for him. It's still a very exploitative relationship with a woman. And it's your little indicator that, like, yeah, Lewis seems like a nice kind of unassuming guy. He's a bit of a beta to Ordell's alpha. But you get that little clue. Hey, Lewis isn't that great of a guy either. So, all of these archetypes and all these ways of using story devices to further these characters are pervasive throughout everybody, and you have to get through these beats so you can understand the world that Jackie is about to enter into when she's in the airport parking deck and gets stopped by 2 ATF agents.
It is true. Seeing all these women in his life, seeing all the people that are around him, how they behave and how they work together, and then when we get to the ATF agents, I keep calling them the police, but they're arms people, traffic guys. That's what I call them, the arms traffic guys.
Law enforcement, yes.
Okay, there we go. Law enforcers. There's 2 of them, and can we talk about one of them?
Keaton, he has
Michael
a fantastic, it's a smaller role in the context of this film, but Detective Ray Nicolette is wildly interesting.
He is so funny.
Because when Jackie gets stopped, his buddy is this kind of, he plays the bad cop, kind of this, like, smarmy dickhead character. But Ray is, like, if you could make a golden retriever into a police officer, that's Ray Nicolette. He is this glory hound who is obsessed with finding justice, obsessed with making the big bust, wants to get that gratification, and is eager to do the work of policing alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And you see that enthusiasm in the way he deals with Jackie. Whereas this other guy is, putting on the airs of authority, he has almost that kind of, like, insecurity of, she's not going to respect me if I'm not authoritative. Michael Keaton plays the role of Ray Nicolette by being very easy and very loose with Jackie. He doesn't play the good cop in a traditional way. He plays the good cop as kind of streetwise and, cocksure. And it's a very interesting take.
I like it. I think it's refreshing. I think, like, at that point, I was like, oh, it's going to be a cop thing. And I was like, okay, this is going to be interesting. Because the good cop, bad cop play is always, like, tiring. Like, you know what's going to happen. You expect it. But the way this character is portrayed, Michael Keaton's character, he has this sort of experience behind him, unlike usual good cops. Usually the good cop is always that budding guy and always, like, fumbling around, still trying to prove something. And, like, while this character has a little bit of that in the air, I think those aren't the defining things that really kind of shape his character. And you see that with his interactions with his partner, as they're, bringing Jackie in and interrogating her and trying to understand the situation, but also looking for their gain. They want to succeed. They want to get this bus. It seems as if they have been tracking this and planning this for a while. And that's when you realize there is more to the story than, the script is at least leading on to until now.
And the cops is not like an immediately chummy thing, but critically, they're not truly out and out disrespectful of Jackie. They understand that they need to work with her, and they're firm with her. And and there is a lot played up in these scenes about the relationships between law enforcement and people of color, which are very important to go into. Jackie is very hostile. I'm not going to say another goddamn word. A lot of that sort of response, but there is a baseline of trying to treat her like a human being until they entrap her and get her thrown in jail that really does exist. Like, she, treating her badly is not something that is important to them in the same way that treating her well is not something important. She is working in service of their plot. They are essentially neutral in this story relative to Jackie, and they are portrayed as such in these scenes. But she does end up, locked up, and she ends up with bail being set at the exact same amount it was set for Beaumont. So Ordell, bails her out and sends Max Cherry to pick her up, and this is when, as, they say, the plot thickens, because the moment Max Cherry doesn't even see her face, doesn't see anything about her but her silhouette, he is absolutely struck down by love the moment he sees her.
Oh, it's like on and poppin' with the music. Bow now. Like, immediately, the Mac has turned on, his gaze is fixed, and it's like, it's such a cute moment, because, like, he's like he's an older guy, and, like, you don't normally see, like, older guys getting that puppy love. Like, it was so refreshing. Like, I was like, oh, is this how it's gonna go? It's not gonna be some damsel in distress, really, even though she's walking out of a prison, because she's handling the situation the best she can. He's like purely coincidental. It's not like he's an instrument to her success. She's doing this all herself, and I think that's what was so cool, is like seeing Jackie meet Max like that. You kind of get to see that young love in two older characters that you just don't normally see, that's so genuine, so raw. And again, it is strictly one-sided at this point, because Jackie's a little preoccupied with, this crisis that is happening, aka just getting out of lockup and having to deal with Ordell. But you can see from Max that he is definitely interested in her. He has one thing on his mind, and it's not malicious. It's wholesome. It's actually like, I need to know her. I have to love her already, without much of emotions being exchanged.
And it's interesting too, because it is really your clue in this scene that Max is a good guy, because his instinct, yes, he's love struck. He has this, like, almost face of, like, boyhood type wonder when he sees her for the first time, but he quickly subverts that and is invested in trying to make Jackie comfortable and in informing her of the situation. In fact, it is he who tells Jackie that that her bond was the exact same cost as Beaumont's bond, and explains that Ordell paid it in the exact same way. So he kind of saves Jackie's skin more than once in the scene, because he's not only getting her out of jail, but he's telling her what the state of play is, so that she is forewarned about the circumstances that she's walking back into. She has been bailed out at the behest of this gun runner who is absolutely paranoid underneath all his cool, deeply, deeply paranoid that the people around him are going to snitch. It's why he killed Beaumont, because he didn't think Beaumont could do 5 years in prison. He also doesn't seem to think Jackie's going to be able to do time in prison either. But Jackie has one critical advantage against him that Beaumont didn't, and that is Max Cherry.
He is it. It is that, like, link, that one loose straw, that you're not sure if you tied up that loose end, and you get the feeling early on that at least this situation of Max kind of being invested in Jackie might come into play later on in the story.
And not only that, you get this really interesting juxtaposition over these course of these scenes, because when Max takes her home, Ordell's already, like, right there. He's waiting in his car listening to Johnny Cash as he watches Jackie get dropped off. And it really is this point where you start noticing that Ordell is kind of this, like, phantom, like, specter kind of figure. You don't really see him when he's cool and collected. You don't really see him travel anywhere. He is just there. He pops up almost like an apparition in a location where other people have gone. He is this sort of magnetic, ethereal kind of spectral negative force. And you see him, enjoying that. Like, he's planning on, he puts the gloves on, he's clearly getting ready to strangle or shoot Jackie. And, he has to be invited in like a vampire to Jackie's home. And he's trying to do all of his stuff by turning down the lights, trying to work in darkness. And unfortunately for him, the tables get turned because Jackie was able to lift Max's gun from his glove compartment before she got home. And ultimately, she turns the tables on Ordell for the first time in the film and does not allow him to be in control. And it is this complete switch from being a little bit guarded with Max, trying to, get some semblance of normalcy back, straight on top of it when Ordell comes to kill her. It's this really interesting shift to see, okay, this is actually a boss bitch here.
Yes, it's like, It's so exciting because it's that cat and mouse game. You know, clearly you're worried. You're like, is my guy Ordell, Sam Jack's about to pull up and just blab our MC, like our main character, like that? Like you can't.
You're scarred. You're scarred ever since we saw Psycho. Now that we've seen Psycho, it's like, oh, she's a main character. She's gonna die.
Yes, I'm like, what is happening? Like I'm literally like, oh no no no, right? So we get to this point, and I'm like, okay, what's gonna happen? And as Jackie really does kind of reclaim the situation, which could be easily a triggering scene for many women in a dark room with somebody. Yeah, like that in your home, no less. But she stood her ground, she stood her claim, and actually is getting what she needs, and arguably a little bit even more in the situation by acquiring even more knowledge of Ordell's operation, which she then uses to kind of build out this scheme.
It's really interesting. She really does turn it on its head and does find a way to actually scheme to get herself out. She's already in the process of trying to get away from this life. This experience in jail and being bailed out has clearly taught her that she needs to do something else. But it's so interesting to see her be on top of all that. And then the very next morning, Max Cherry shows up at her place to, get his gun back. And Jackie is no longer putting up those tough airs. She is, I hesitate to say a girly girl, but she is very feminine and very comfortable in her own home when Max is there and he shows up. She's invested in making sure he feels good. She's invested in trying to entertain him by putting on some good music. She's clearly, a little bit into this guy and clearly being a little bit more sort of, I guess, open with him compared to these previous scenes where it's just, here's the plan. I'm telling you like it is. This is how we're going to get me money. This is how we're going to fix this situation. She's suddenly, shoot, the milk spoiled while I was in jail. I'm sorry. Do you take your coffee black? Little things like that. And it's one of the most interesting scenes in the film to me because not only do you see this side of vulnerability from both Jackie and Max, but they have a very frank conversation with each other over coffee about getting older and about their fears with aging. Where they talk, it starts off simply with, Jackie talking about, Max's, hair and, him mentioning, oh yeah, I did something about losing my hair and it going gray and, now I look in the mirror and I see me. But it gets much more in depth about these are two people who are desperately afraid of having to start over more than anything. They live in kind of this over the hill, 40s, 50s existence with the regrets of, how they set themselves up early in their lives. But, they understand they are where they are and that this is how they're drawn as people. And so what scares them is the idea that they would have to reassess and refigure out who they are at this stage in their lives is more pressing than any kind of jail time to either of them or any kind of consequence that anyone else could put upon them. And that's when you start to see that there is a true, real bond of trust between Jackie and Max. You can see the gears turning. You can see Jackie realizing she can trust Max to be a part of her scheme. But it's done through a very heartfelt, kind of sad conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that conversation up because it is true. It's like, he's coming back for the gun. They don't really even hang on or harbor on the main situation, the plot. Like I'm sitting there, BK me first time, staring at him holding the gun because they keep panning to these awesome shots where you see him rubbing the gun, and I'm like, are we not going to talk about the plot? And they're over here being waxing philosophical about their lives and about where they're going and about if they're have achieved that livelihood, kind of first date vibes, getting to know a person, and they're having this conversation, and me, BK, raging in the corner is like, can we talk about the plot? But I started to like them though. Once again, second time around, that's why I telling you got to watch this movie at least twice. You go a second time around, you're like, oh yeah, forget about the plot. Who cares about the plot? I want to, I want to know how they're opening up to each other. I want to know if he's going to say his feelings about her, if he has true feelings about her. Is she even reciprocating remotely? And you do start to see at least both of them opening up on different fronts for different reasons. With him, with Max, you see him opening up to his personal life, which you think, he's never really thought about before when she asks him about what he does for a living. Versus her, she's opening up on her practicality about, what she's going to do in her life and what her plans for the future are. And it's honestly really good building blocks for a solid, non-toxic relationship. And I really like to see it. You don't see it often in film.
This is really the crux of the second act of the film. It's not really about the heists. Like, in terms of getting the money into the country, it's a real simple process. Jackie gets the money. The cops, verify that she's got certain amounts of money. She goes to a mall with a shopping bag and does a little handoff in the food court. The crime in this film is a nothing. But the way people interact around each other because of the crime is fascinating. Like, immediately after this, you go to a scene of Melanie and Lewis hanging out. In the Hermosa Beach apartment again. And, it's just these two people who are a little bit awkward around each other, one of whom, Melanie, is extremely horny in the scene, and Lewis, who just, can't take a hint, has no ability to get any sort of cues, is not receptive at all. And they're trying to catch up and they're trying to discuss life in a kind of a similar vein, but they don't go deep with it. They see the experiences that they've had, but they don't have this analysis about them that Jackie and Max do. They're kind of trapped by their circumstances and they live through them the best they can. They don't have any aspirations of being untrapped by those circumstances, or in Melanie's case, they have those aspirations, but they're incapable of putting them into action because they're not tactful about going about and doing it. And so you're seeing these little interactions and the way these people are with each other in the building up of this. You see Ordell go to meet Jackie at a bar to discuss the plan, and the first discussions aren't about, like, we're going to do this, this, and this to get the money in, and this is how we're going to fool the cops. It's a discussion about, Ordell sees her in the bar and is like, damn, Jackie, I bet you do fucking well with the guys here. I bet you pick up, scores of men here. And, it's, him trying to make her one of the boys, trying to be comfortable with her and gain control while they have this other thing to discuss. And it's why the film is so engrossing. The power dynamics and the power struggle comes through the interactions and the hanging out. It doesn't come through the struggle over the money.
Totally. It's such a strategic debate, because some of these scenes, like, again, first watch through, you're like, why am I here? What am I seeing? Like, genuinely, that's how I felt. We go to the beach and we're seeing Melanie and Lewis, and I'm like, why are we watching them get busy in the kitchen? Why are we here? No, seriously, I was like, this is meaningless. Why? This has nothing to do with the plot. The plot is in the gun that's back in the house. And the last scene. Okay, there's no plot going on right now. But you watch it through the second time and you're like, oh, this is important. One, because it's showing that these characters aren't forgettable characters, that these are characters that are going to be around. They're not just side characters. They're going to have an effect on the outcome of the story. And we're going to see whose character is really in control here when we see Melanie really pretty much manhandle that whole situation, and really give permission to Lewis to do some, adultery, if you will. Yeah,
she literally has to say to the guy, "Wanna fuck?"
DTF. So you get that side of Melanie that you don't see when Ordell is in the room, and you get to see that Melanie could have some sort of power, can have some sort of control, maybe a bit more than we were led on earlier. Then you go to the bar as well, seeing how Jackie interacts with Ordell on quote-unquote same footing, right? It's no longer her trying to get the jump and her trying to stake her claim. It's they're pulling up. Arguably, Jackie has more control of the situation, and Ordell is fighting to get it. And that's continued to see throughout the film, while Ordell is really trying to always be the main guy, be the alpha in the situation, always have control and power, and really, force that upon the people around him. But with Jackie, it does not seem to work. And even when he thinks it does, it's really clear to the viewer that he does not have the reins.
Absolutely. And we start seeing that sort of happening under the surface when they do the run through for the money drop. They do a quick little, mini heist where they have $10K they're going to bring in and hand off to somebody that's eventually going to get the money to Ordell. And the cops, they're fully in on it. They're just going to watch it. They're not picking anybody up. They just want to understand how the money drop, quote unquote, works. And there are a couple things to focus on in this scene story-wise. First, I should let you go off on Jackie's fit in this scene, though, because you're looking for that fit as we speak.
I am. Oh my gosh, that beret, queen.
The black beret with the black tank, it's a fantastic look.
One is just symbolic. Like, so here I know this was strategic, right? Because first of all, we need to talk about the fact that they're both wearing berets, her and Sam Jackson, because that's hilarious. Like, why are they twinning? That's so conspicuous, but whatever. Which is why I feel like it's a nod a little bit with the costume design in certain situations or certain moments to, the blaxploitation films we were talking about, where it was very, like, matchy-matchy, very out there. But at the same time, it wasn't too out there. It was actually very hip with the time. It was very stylish, and I think that's what's so cool is they were focusing more on like being that hip and being someone who does have enough money to meet up with those styles, which is important to set the stage. That Jackie can look fly too, right? She doesn't have to, always be in her work clothes. Like, we can see her look sexy. We can see her be this very powerful, very swaggy woman in public, no less checking Ordell in public, which is something, that shouldn't be seen. And that scene is just, oh God, I'm literally just gushing. I'm like, as soon as I find that beret, I am doing this cosplay, all right? No cap.
Well, what gets me about the scene is it's another incredible conversation between Jackie and Max, as Max just happens to have gone to the movies to just, catch a feature in the middle of the day. And Jackie spies him in the food court and gets, waves him over to sit down. They're clearly starting to get into each other. But the conversation centers around, if you had the opportunity to walk away with $500,000, Max, would you do it? And it transpires that Max is considering retiring at this point. He wants to get away from bail bonds. He realizes that, it's not worth it anymore to him to be involved in this. And he reached that decision the night he picked up Jackie from jail. And it's this really interesting rumination on whether or not he wants to bring home his life's work, but he dodges the question on screen that Jackie wants to ask. And it's a very cool little back and forth between them that lets you know that Max is a little bit interested in taking part in this. And then he, steps back. He watches Jackie interact with the bag girl, Sharonda, who is another one of these kept women by Ordell, who is a real foil to Jackie. She's this very broken girl, lacks a lot of confidence, barely looks up from her plate or from the floor. And, they have a brief conversation. Jackie makes her feel a little bit good about herself. They switch the bags and they go. And then there's an, unbeknownst to everybody else, another bag switch. But, Max gets to sit there and observe this woman's intelligence and her, craftiness in putting this plan together. And you see this, it's an even broader smile on his face seeing this exchange work than it is even when, he's getting to know her and fall in love with her. He's enamored and fascinated by just how well this woman can pull this off.
Yeah, I think that's what really gets Max to, I think, truly fall for her. In a weird way, it's almost like seeing a woman really excel at her craft. You see that, right? Or your significant other really is out there doing their thing. Well, that was it. Max saw that and was like, oh, okay. All right. And the music goes, and you know it's on and popping when the music drops, and that's when I was like, okay, I'm kind of invested in this dynamic. I really like them. I ship it so hard. Can we get a happy ending, please? please, please. But it's just beginning, right? That was just the trial run. We hadn't even gotten to the big bucks. And of course, there's a change of plans, right? Things are a little bit more different than the first time around.
Absolutely, because Jackie's been playing both sides here. She is playing the cops to make them think that she is going to let them get to Ordell through these money exchanges. They're going to find a way to link him to guns, and they're going to catch Ordell with guns, and that's going to be the great big bust for Ray and his partner. Meanwhile, Jackie is also talking to Ordell about, like, hey, here's how we're going to do this exchange so that the cops don't even have a chance at getting the money. But she's also talking with Max about, like, I don't want the ATF to have the money, and I don't want Ordell to have the money. I'd like to have the money. And, Max has very serious and very legitimate doubts that he voices to her about the plan. Not in a derogatory way, he just discusses very plainly the facts of the situation and works with her through all the things that could go wrong. But when we get to the actual scene of the money drop, the real one, you see it happen 3 times through 3 entirely different perspectives, and it's a very important way to sort of bring these different heads together with all of these characters to really bring their universes into focus and to show how, when shit goes down, how they're actually going to interact with each other. And, spoiler people, it doesn't go well for everybody.
To say the least, Jack, it does not indeed go well for them. I can't believe it. I was shook. But you gotta break it down, because it is 3 different POVs. So there's a lot to digest here.
The correct and proper weight. And this is how she's planning on fooling Ordell and all of them to get away scot-free with the money. But that still doesn't answer the question of what she's going to do to get away from the police and get away from her culpability with them, because they know that $50,000 are in that bag. They don't know about the $500,000, but they know about 50,000 of it. And they are going to come down on her if even a cent of that is missing. So you see Jackie leave the dressing room. She leaves this bag of $500,000 just in the dressing room and starts walking around in a total panic. She pretends to be harried at the register. She, pays very frantically. And is then walking around this mall without any of the confidence you saw in her in the opening scene with her strut. You see this very nervous, very concerned woman. She's, a little bit frantic almost, quote unquote, looking for the cops. And, you see this as the first take of, what happens. And you're like, why is she so, shocked all of a sudden? Why is she so shook? And it's only through the second 2 that you see the real purpose of what she's doing.
Yeah, I love the reveal of that, in a storytelling way. I'm really glad that they broke it down that way. It actually made it far more dynamic and honestly a way more of immersive experience, because you kind of still have an opportunity to put the pieces together. But seeing the second heist, I guess it's a heist, right? I don't know. It's more of a scheme, but technically, the second run through the big bucks, the shebang, it's honestly nerve-wracking because you're super in it for Jackie, and then second pass through, you kind of are invested in Melanie because you're tired of her being abused for the whole film, right? And being walked all over. Even though she's a little bit of annoying, we can all agree.
But you're right though. This is the scene where Melanie really shines in this second run through of the big heist.
Yeah, she totally shows that she is not useless. Like, and that's being generous, because she really doesn't do anything. You see her lounging around, flexing her femininity for most of the time, and then being barked at by Ordell. So here now, with Mr. Barely Competent Lewis, in a very critical portion and role within the plan, Melanie is holding it down for the team. Melanie is actually the one calling the shots. Whether or not she's running late is to be debatable, but she's definitely someone who has a bigger head on her shoulders compared to Lewis, and in this situation, she's fully navigating it. And honestly, the only one keeping her cool out of the two.
Oh, 100%. It's such an interesting little touch that, even Lewis, who has been, this very passive guy, he's trying to be aggressive here towards Melanie, and it just isn't working. He's just coming across as a total loose cannon and a live wire and a liability, quite frankly, to this plan. Melanie's able to stay in her deal. She chills. She's even, able to nonchalantly compliment Jackie on, her outfit before she goes to see her. And, she takes care of the bag exchange, without any incident whatsoever. And meanwhile, Lewis is, yelling at her to shut the fuck up. He's grabbing her painfully by the wrist and, yanking her around and stuff like that. And Melanie does have this glorious moment as they're leaving the mall of, she's like, you know what, I'm done with this shit. And she starts goading Lewis in his insecurity. He's looking for a way out of the mall, and she's like, is that where we parked? No, that's the way to Sears.
It's my favorite part.
And then, is it this, is the car in this aisle, Lewis? Is it in this aisle, Lewis? And just, absolutely, reading this guy for filth. And reading him for how, loose he is with his abilities. And it is this beautiful moment where she is taking, for the first time in the film, some real power for herself. But because this is a tragedy in a very Shakespearean sense, Lewis decides that he wants the power back from her and kills her. He shoots her twice in the parking lot and just leaves her lying there. And of course, the moment he has this control back in the narrative of the story, the moment she's dead, he finds the car and is able to leave. And it's this really poignant, tragic moment within the script because, yes, Melanie was deeply annoying and irritating in these scenes. She's absolutely trying to get to him, but she certainly didn't deserve to die.
Totally, she did not. And it's funny because when Lewis does meet up with Ordell and they talk about the situation, because they're supposed to be dropping off the money, and Ordell does find out what has happened, he keeps saying over and over again, he could have just hit her. And I laugh because honestly, like at that moment, I'm like, I would have rather seen him turn around and smack her than her being slaughtered in the goddamn parking lot and then just walks away, no remorse. It's tragic.
And it's just that it's that perfect cue that, these guys are complete pieces of shit because the only options that enter their mind is hitting her or killing her. There was, there was no other frame of reference for them. But this scene in the car with Lewis and Ordell is phenomenally important because this is the point where Ordell, as the cool, collected guy, disappears forever. He takes a quick second to think through everything that's transpired and realizes that it's Jackie Brown who has screwed him. But that's the last moment of being truly collected that he has. He clearly has taken the murder of Melanie personally. He gets into a heated shouting match with Lewis that ends up with him shooting Lewis at point blank range in the car and leaving his dead body on the side of the road. He is in a conversation with Max Cherry over the phone. He's like, listen, I know you did it. I know you helped her. You better bring me my fucking money. And you see the whole facade that this guy has tried to create for himself, this whole Mr. Big personality that he has completely faded. And you see this insecure, irrational criminal underneath all of the bombast and all of the bluster. And it's, I would say, honestly, some of Sam Jackson's finest acting work. Because we all know that Sam Jackson is able to play calm, cool, collected whenever he wants to. He is all about it. But when he's playing that style, but he's playing it with a steep, deep level of insecurity underneath it, that is next level shit from him, honestly.
It's honestly breathtaking. I think it's really dope. One, to see Sam Jackson's like commitment to the character, but two, to see the evolution of the character, right? See the descent into madness, as we like to say here on the RFN podcast. He loses it all. There is no control, and honestly, that's seen at the lowest when Ordell is telling Max to come over, right, to get the to drop off the money, and he's in the house with, what was her name again?
Sharonda.
Sharonda, right? And even Sharonda has a weird sense of kind of more control of the household that is chaotic that he is in, and Odell is kind of just there, just grasping at straws to try to find some sort of rock to ground himself and find some sort of power. And you see him like pull this with the way he talks, the way he carries himself. You see him all disheveled for the first time, no ponytail. It's all out, just wilding out. And you're like, man, you've never seen him unkempt before. He assumes like a higher position on the chair there to really assert his dominance and just try to regain any sort of control over the situation, because it is out of his hands now. There's not one loose end. There is a whole situation happening. This could be the end of the line.
And that's what gets me about his performance and about the blocking of these scenes. And I don't know if it was Sam Jackson just being a brilliant actor, or if it was a conscious choice between Tarantino and Jackson through conversations about how they wanted to set up the scenes. But Ordell, who has been doing all of these sort of little ticks to kind of assert his power over the course of the film, suddenly he's doing all these little affectations of dominance, like you said, sitting up higher in the chair. When he and Max are going back to the bail bonds office, he says, no, I'll drive. And, doing all of these little things to try and be like, I'm powerful. I'm the one with the power. It's like he's like yelling at the clouds that he's powerful, almost. And it's just such an interesting way of seeing his whole experience become subverted in the film, because he's not comfortable. He's not collected. Jackie is the one carrying the cards here, even though she herself at this point is dealing with a deeply angry Ray Nicolette, who thought he was going to get the bust of his life. So she's holding together all of these little threads to try and make sure things can work out for her in the end. And it's the most tense situation for her. But even in this moment of high tension and unpredictability, she still has more power over Ordell. So does Max Cherry at this point. He shows up to kind of, in a joking, sarcastic way, give him back the money for Beaumont because Beaumont got murdered. But as they go to, back to his bail bonds place to meet Jackie Brown, when Ordell turns on his stereo, it's playing the Delphonics, which is the music Jackie put on for him in her apartment. And Ordell kind of realizes he's not truly in control. He has this little comment, "You didn't tell me you liked the Delphonics." And he goes, they're pretty good. And there's this difference in comfort the two men have as they're driving along to the office that is just very present within the way the story is posed here.
I love it. I think it's really dope. This is when the writing really starts to hit too, because you're like, all right, well, how are we going to come to this resolution? How is it going to play out? Because you know what's going to happen. Like, you knew Jackie was going one up for a while. You felt it in your bones. At least I did. I might be a god tier speculator, but at least I did. And when you get to this point where, Ordell is pulling up, like you said, and he's talking about all these things, trying to really like show his true colors, I think. You really start to see him get super desperate, asking, oh, are you sure? Is there anything else you want to tell me, type of thing? Like, if I go in, there better not be anybody else there. And it's like, you've asked that 3 times, bro. Like, the answer isn't going to change, and you already know it's probably a setup. Like, why are you asking? Like, don't go in. Like, you know that's what's going to happen. Like, why? So honestly, those last moments there, it's almost just like watching, Dead Man Walking. Like, he's still fighting for control in the situation. It's very symbolic for me when I saw it for the first time, and he gets in there. And then the conclusion here, whew, Jack, can we talk about it? Because
Ray does get the drop on Ordell.
Yep.
He gets his little glory here. And it's an interesting moment because, Ordell's found with the $40,000 on his person. It wraps up in a nice little bow for Ray, but, you're left with just this moment of there's still tension there for Jackie and Max. They're not quite out of the woods yet.
Oh no, it is true because we do need that full closure. But I wanted to talk about how it didn't play out how I thought it would, right? The fact that Ordell did get the jump on, that the setup wasn't Jackie Brown, right? Typically in the blaxploitation films, right? Foxy Brown, she's putting him out, right? She whipping out the gun, here we go, I got him. But she's not the one who takes the kill. She doesn't need to have that blood on her hands, which I think is kind of nice. But she did facilitate the capture and death of this guy, and it's definitely on her hands still because she preemptively said he has a gun. You don't see any gun in that shot. Arguably, I don't know if he has a gun. He could have many guns, right? But the last pistol we saw Jackie had, right? That's the gun she's holding on to. So it's very interesting how that scene kind of played out. And I was like, wow, this is dope. This is cool. It was unexpected. I think that's what has a very strong weight. And honestly, kind of weighs on Jackie's shoulders as she meets up with Max again after the situation has resolved and they kind of exchange finally in anime fashion their feelings for each other. Like, you've waited the whole goddamn movie for this. This is clearly a love story, now I know, and now I'm invested and I'm ready for this kiss to happen, and thank the heavens we at least do in fact get that. Jack, I was going to literally lose my mind if I didn't get that.
We do get the kiss, but at the same time, Jackie Brown is not going to let you out with a truly positive ending. These people have gone through this circumstance and they have a real love and affection for each other. But there is this, air of discomfort there. There's a sense that Max is a little bit afraid of Jackie. She even, asks him, are you afraid of me? And he goes, yeah, a little bit. And, Max, he's only taken a small amount of the money. He's let Jackie have most of the money. Jackie is concerned, she's, trying to say to herself, I didn't use you, Max. Almost, trying to convince herself a little bit. But there's this deep love, but there's also this, I guess, region that they can't go to for each other at the end here. At the end of the day, Max is still kind of trapped by his circumstances as a bail bondsman. He's still kind of trapped by the world he's in. He's not in a position where he wants or feels like he can start over. Whereas Jackie, her only choice is to start over with this new money that she has. And they want to be with each other. They have the choice to choose to be with each other, and they choose not to be, and instead choose to leave each other with broken hearts. And it is this really profound, tragic ending, I think, because, I'm getting goosebumps discussing it. I get goosebumps every time we watch it. It's this really sad reflection on love and loss. It's this moment where these two people who have had to do something that is difficult and seedy, but that they don't regret because they did it for each other. It is this moment where they both realize what they regret. They regret this inability to be with each other in the long term. And that, to me, is much more profoundly sad than if, Ordell had shot Max, or if Ordell had shot Jackie, or if Jackie goes back to jail. Those outcomes to me are not as sad as these two being on the cusp of having everything and then losing each other in that moment.
Yeah, it's more than sad, Jack. It's heart-wrenching. That is it. That is that's what gets you, where you're like, man, all the satisfaction you thought you had 2 beats ago, just take all of that, put it in a ball, shake it up in a carbonated thing with a cap on, and let it just explode into tears of depression and loneliness as you contemplate your life as forever becoming an older person, how you'll never find love, and you are just Jackie Brown in the car in 110th Street. Okay, it's a very moving moment, guys, and Jack, you said it far more eloquently than my emotions, but my God, it sets the tone again, right back to where we started, where you watch it for the second time, and in the intro, you're feeling sad like how you felt at the end of the first time you're watching it. Like, it's such a good 180 coming back to her, grounding the story. As air of hope, yes, a new life, yes, an air of empowerment and taking your life into your own hands, but also that bittersweetness, that sorrow, that tragedy that we say, like, this is definitely a tragedy. There, no love to be had, I guess, but love is there, and that's what hurts. It's not that they didn't love each other. It's the fact that they loved each other, but they couldn't, bring that love to fruition. That's what takes your heart out. Squeeze it, step on it. It's bad. It's bad, Jack. Why'd you make me watch this?
I'm a firm believer that it's a good. I genuinely think it's a good thing to watch films that'll break your heart, and Jackie Brown will break your heart. It's a great, incredible film. It is the type of film that you can hang out and watch, but when you look at it closely, it's going to break your heart, because that's what the most masterful stories are capable of doing. They're capable of evoking emotions like that. And Jackie Brown is, in a way, it's kind of a forgotten film for Tarantino, but I think it's kind of his most emotional. And it's sad that it gets forgotten for a couple of reasons, not just because it's a great film, but because there were some pretty important and relevant controversies around this film when it came out. Now, Jackie Brown caused a huge and very public spat between Tarantino and Spike Lee, specifically because of something that we need to talk about with Tarantino. It's something you have to address. His very, very liberal use of racial slurs throughout his scripts.
Oh, it's super prominent. One, I mean, probably why a lot of people, again, I know a lot of people were turned off to his works because of that. But two, the way it's used, and how often it's used. Like, it's like over like 90 something times in this film, or I believe seeing, or maybe it was 60, but that's still a lot. And the controversy is really over whether or not, the N-word, the hard R, with the hard R, or regardless, is appropriate, especially coming and written from a white man. So I think that's really what drives the core of this argument, is how disingenuous it may feel. These words are being written by someone who is not of that culture, who should not be using those words, but for characters that would rightly use them in themselves. So I understand the controversy, and I definitely want to give my opinion on it, but it's very interesting that it offended someone like Spike Lee. Like, you were telling me earlier, Jack, that they were like getting into scraps about it, like verbal like arguments.
Yeah, there was a very well-publicized incident where Spike and his wife were in line at the Angelica Film Center here in New York to go see the Blair Witch Project, and Tarantino found out that they were there, and he, showed up on the line of this film and got into a genuine sort of verbal altercation with Spike over this, where he said some genuinely problematic and troubling things. He claimed to Spike that, like, he understood the black experience better than he did. Just really profane and just, wrong stuff to say to somebody, especially somebody like Spike, who does films that are so racially relevant. It's a very kind of odd sort of thing to happen, and it's something. It's tough to talk about for me, obviously, because as a white person, I shouldn't have any opinions on that, nor will I ever use that word. But it's, there is something to be said for, if you look at a film of Tarantino's like Django, say, what were, people in the South in the 1800s referring to black people as? They were using crass and horrifying words and descriptors to dehumanize these people. And so, from one perspective, as a white person, like, you have to acknowledge that shit. You can't, try to whitewash history or, say that your ancestors didn't use that kind of terminology. But at the same time, it's painful, especially if you know plenty of BIPOC people, because you see this white creative making liberal use of this word that is used to damage and bludgeon people who don't look like him. So it's one of these things where, BK, I just need to get out of the way and let you speak on it, because my opinion is not going to be relevant here.
I appreciate it. But I appreciate your insight, though. And, more people who take the time to really, insert themselves in these types of conversations who are white, they get to understand how we feel about it and see, a lot of people have different viewpoints. And when you told me the story about how they've scrapped over it, it's like Tarantino. It's like, what do you mean you know more of the black experience? Absolutely, that is asinine. But when we get in the conversation of this film, let's talk about this film, all right? Not the actor. I think its usage was done well. It was done tactful. It was done with intention. It wasn't overused. I never for 1 second thought a character was needlessly saying the word. And in Jackie Brown, they mostly use it with the A, not the hard R variant. So typically within our culture, that is a very common used way to talk to each other, especially if we're talking about with arms dealers. We're talking about the situation where we are in the location, in the era. To say that black people in this time period were not saying that is asinine. Okay, so I think that's not truly fair, but it is something to be said. It is very intriguing that a white person could write a script like that and incorporate the usage of the word in a way that is tactful. It makes me wonder if the actors had any say on placement or any say in when and when not they should use that word, because a lot of the times I feel like it's such a word that can't be truly placed, especially from someone who doesn't say it. So I'd love to know more. It's a thing we don't know, but for Jackie Brown, I really think it was arguably necessary. It was arguably necessary.
I think the context I can add here is that seems to be what Sam Jackson's argument was in this spat, is when Spike, was criticizing this initially, Sam Jackson did jump to Tarantino's defense, and with sort of the same argument you made, that how else do you expect people to speak? These are the words that people use. You can't shy away from that. And I understand his point, but I also understand Spike's point when he comes back and says to Sam Jackson, he's entitled to his opinion, but that to me sounds like an apology to a slave master, which is very charged and bitter language to throw at somebody he's as close to as Sam Jackson. But, you understand when you see conversations, deep conversations happening like this between, luminaries of color and between BIPOC people, you understand as a white person looking at it on the outside how important it is to actually have a robust discussion around the use of this word and why it's inappropriate in so many contexts. And so it's something with Jackie Brown I don't feel we can shy away from, because it was such an important part of the cultural conversation at the time it came.
Absolutely. And again, the usage of the word in this film, honestly has weight, which makes me argue that some of it, certain situations when Jackie uses it, when she's confronting Ordell in the dark, the way she emphasizes it, how she delivers the line, it's to the point where I'm like, there's no way Tarantino knew to finesse that. That has to be someone black had to have a little sprinkle there, maybe under the books. We still ain't okay with that. Credit your all your consultations, credit all your contributors. But I have this feeling, because it is done well. It's very easy to see when it's not done well. It's very easy to feel it forced. I have heard works where it's forced. And Jackie, I'm not harboring on that, but bringing it up is super important, because it is a good conversation. And to hear what a creator would say about that and its reactions, it gives you good context. It lets you know, where they're coming from. And if they are, ignorant or have very interesting takes like that, it's very disappointing. But you get to see, I guess, a new side of things and add your own kind of perspective to this situation. And to be able to talk about it here and address, these kind of racial conversations within film, it makes me happy. I feel like Jackie Brown is a film that actually didn't shy away from addressing racial issues within it in its works. There's a lot of times where Ordell uses his race card to kind of try to finesse a situation, and it is immediately met with opposition. And it's very interesting, because it is genuine. As much as you want to say, oh, that's a stereotype, I'm like, oh, but that shit does happen. you can't be upset because you're seeing accurate depictions of things. And that's where I think Jackie Brown really does excel. It puts those in there. It doesn't make it a gimmick. It makes it true. It makes it real. And it really does talk about these moments where, the judges is bringing up how, that might be too high of a bail that the police are asking for, so it lowers it enough, because he looks at Jackie and is like, oh man, the system, these white cops are probably really going to suck it to you, let's make it less.
In a beautiful cameo by Sid Haig, God bless that legend, may he rest in peace.
Yes, R.I.P. But it's something to be said that, if this film was meant with ill intentions, it wouldn't have included those little moments like that, those little nuances. We didn't need to have that exchange, that glance, that cut. It was meant with intention. And that's what makes me happy about this film and applauds me about the way it kind of incorporates a lot of different racial conversations, because it is controversial of the character of Odell and what he's doing. And he's a hustler, but a low bid hustler, talking about that, the lifestyle, how he can, just blab someone in the trunk of a car and get away with it, right? No one's really looking after him after the first death, There's a lot of things to be said about that lifestyle, that situation. And I think it's super, super amazing that this film did touch on that and did it in a really well way. So I will say, although I'm not happy with Tarantino's words to Spike, I am happy with this film and the product that was created. So we gotta rate it now, I think.
Yeah, we do. And before we do, I really do appreciate you being comfortable sharing all that context. It's a tough thing to discuss, but I really appreciate you dealing with it with a lot of grace, BK.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad to have this opportunity to be able to talk about it on the RFN podcast and be able to, and shed light when we can, but also keep it 100.
So BK, I gotta know what you give this film. Since you've now seen it twice, how are you feeling about Jackie Brown?
Jackie Brown, it's a 9 out of 10 for me. Solid 9 out of 10 for me. Ooh. I loved it. I loved it the second time. It wasn't, the first time was not a 9 out of 10. The second time, it became a 9 out of 10.
Interesting. What was it that you think changed between the first and second viewing for you? Was it just that ability to not be in a mode where you felt like you were constrained by needing to follow plot and you could just get the characters, or was it something more?
I think it was a lot of that. I think it was the delivery of the film is a little bit different in Tarantino's. Like, he kind of just shoves you in a world a lot of the time, and this one is more of a gradual pull into the world. So I was very one-track minded, and the story was a very slow burn on the plot. Like, it took a while for the plot to gain relevance, and the characters were all kind of just there. But then after I saw what had happened, and watching it a second time, I'm no longer having to worry about the plot. Like you said, just throw it away. The plot is the gun that's still on the kitchen table, back there in that scene. And now I'm here just hanging out with all these characters. I'm laughing my ass off. Demi Moore is in the Girls Who Love Guns video.
A girl who looks like Demi Moore is in the Girls
Oh, it's not her?
Video.
Okay, well.
No. It's just Bridget Fonda making a joke in that
Okay,
context.
well, she looked like her. All right, I got juked. It looked like her. But you see what I'm saying, right? They're out here mobbing in the bikinis. I'm laughing. I'm over here like, yeah, let me have a drink with Ordell because he gonna get blapped later, but it's okay. I can't wait to see that. Things like that. It made the second experience like a ride. It was such a good time. Like, it's a movie I highly recommend 2 watch throughs for sure.
Excellent. I'm pleased yet again. I'm putting you on to these films that you end up enjoying. It makes me feel very good about my side of the suggestions during the season. I give this one, I'd say I give it a 9 as well. It might have been a little bit higher for me if I didn't have the added context of the conversations that went on around the film, how kind of fraught it was. But you can't deny the script. Elmore Leonard himself called it not only the best adaptation of his own work, but the best script he had ever read, which, getting that kind of praise from the author of the source material is pretty incredible. And in the way that this film plays out, it is just that hangout vibe. It is getting to know people through a situation, not the situation defining the people. And that's the work that really speaks to me. It reminds me in a weird way of Apocalypse Now, in almost a direct inverse, because they're both very human stories, but they're being defined by different circumstances in inverse. In Jackie Brown, the characters define the heist. In Apocalypse Now, the trip down the river, or up the river, defines the members of the PT boat. And so it's interesting to see the ways in which characters are played with in these constructs for me, and that's always going to be something that is enduring for me as the power of film. So 9 out of 10 with this. That script, and of course, again, we didn't say enough about it, but the masterful editing of Sally Menke, it's a superb film. I highly recommend giving it those 2 watches, like BK said.
Guys, I'm not a fan of you gotta watch it twice a second time. I'm a very rare person to say that for things. Like, there are only a few films I could say. So
Blade Runner.
Yeah, honestly, let's talk about Akira. I'm telling you.
We'll get to Akira, BK.
Okay,
That's done the pipeline.
All right, let me not give it away. But yes, that being said, we need to talk about what is coming up and talk about what we've got in store for you coming up next week. It's going to be something so good because we're getting back into the sci-fi.
It's good, but we just can't seem to get away from ill-fated romance, BK, because we're going to be looking at the 1995 film 12 Monkeys. But because we discovered through a little trick of fate, there are 2 sides of this. We're going to be doing a little bit of a double feature next week because, full disclosure, 12 Monkeys is a movie that I've actually missed. So BK has that on me. She's seen it. She knows what to expect in 12 Monkeys. However, she was not aware, and a lot of people don't seem to be aware, that 12 Monkeys is directly based off of a work by French director Chris Marker, who in 1962 did a little short film called La Jetée that is the entire basis for 12 Monkeys. And BK hadn't seen that, so we thought, you know what, we're all about film history here at Revenge of the Film Nerds. We are about bringing you guys the context, the through lines that show you not just how these films work, but how we got to the world that could create these films. So we are going to watch La Jetée, and we are going to watch 12 Monkeys, and we're going to compare, contrast them. We're going to look at the way it's outlined, and we could not be more excited to be changing it up a little bit for this project because both films are exceptional, and we can't wait to bring them to you.
I am so amped. It's going to be amazing. Again, yes, sci-fi, love and romance, tragedy, everything BK loves and stands for. And I'm so happy that you guys have been listening to us and sticking with us throughout this pandemic. I know things have been so hard, so everyone who has listened this far makes it to the end. We adore you and appreciate you for supporting the podcast.
As of this recording, BK, this is the first day since November where the country has been under 100,000 daily cases of COVID, so things are starting to improve.
Yes, things are looking up and sending out all those hopeful vibes, all those good vibes for everyone out there. Please stay safe. Thank you so much. And please check us out. You know where to find us out on Twitter, RFN_podcast, and on Instagram, Revenge of the Film Nerds. Yes, we do have the full title there. And we can hear you anywhere, any platform. So if you're listening to us on Buzzsprout, do know that we are on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts as well.
And that alarm means I think it's time for us to go, BK.
That is it. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Manly Jack Manly, where can they find you out in the interwebs?
Well, they're going to be able to find me at Manly Jack Manly on Instagram and on Twitter. I also go by A Waste of Space on Twitch and Discord. It would be nice if I could speak. But yeah, no, I'm, getting myself back into good shape. I'm starting to relaunch my social media for my wrestling now that it actually looks like I'm going to be able to start to get back in the ring over the summer. Fingers crossed. But yeah, no, things are moving. We keep moving with this podcast and we keep promoting ourselves and we keep getting bigger and better with it. And we could not be happier to have you along for the ride, guys.
Yes, yes, yes. And you know where you can find you go, BK. I'm out here on Twitch Monday and Wednesday nights live, playing those games, giving you those good vibes. So we hope to see you around for the next episode. Please let us know what you would like to see for our future seasons. Drop us all the love in all the social tweets. Let us know in stream, and we will hope to bring you some of the classics you want to see as well. Thank you so much
good to me.
For hanging out with us, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, guys. Thank you, Jack, for being with us today.
Thank you, BK.
And that is it. And this was our event podcast.
All right, take care, y'all.
See ya, Janet.